You are attending the de-escalation training. And so really, my name is Galen Feeney-Coyle. I'm a rehousing program officer with Host. And so I'll kind of just be doing a lot of surface level introduction to crisis de-escalation and go from there. So feel free to hop off mute if there's any questions that come off. But from there, we will start. Let's see. Okay, so with the agenda today and the purpose, what we're really looking at is kind of identifying different behavior types that warrant the intervention of de-escalation skills and different practices. And so what we'll kind of cover is those different strategies to use as de-escalation practices, and then how to avoid de-escalation before it happens. So many of you are in the shelter area of work, and what we're seeing is kind of this everyday presence of escalated behaviors within guests. And for many different reasons, how this might show up is increased voices, just within that volume of voices, and short temperament. If there are different triggers that are being set off, these are different reasons for some of those behaviors to exist. And then these situations can be really peacefully resolved with these different techniques. And so what we're looking at is how to engage, how to build those relationships with individuals. So really trying to avoid needing to use these different skills and kind of be proactive with that. That being said, there are certain times when calling authorities, calling 911, getting someone truly skilled to intervene in this if it does go beyond something that we are safely intervening in. And so keeping that in mind, really just of calling 911, understanding your threshold, and then also your agency's policies around that, really finding that fine-tune area. So there might be several different escalation examples that you all have experienced so far. And we can maybe give some examples at the end of the training just to kind of put some real pieces into context. And so what we're looking at is how escalation kind of comes to the situation with a guest, and then what that looks like in terms of the intensity. And then this is where I'm kind of going to guide you to using those best practices within your agency to better understand what the next safety pieces are. And so sometimes what I had mentioned is those different triggers, which result in distress and being upset, being re-traumatized. That also kind of leads into other guests of the shelter, is that if this is a point that's re-traumatizing people, we really want to intervene to avoid that. And then also what that escalation can look like if they are under different substances, really being careful with that piece as well, and kind of knowing what to look for on a mental health and substance use, different triggers. So why would we want to de-escalate these situations? As said, you all have likely experienced different behaviors that result in a environment shift, and really kind of damaging the peace of that environment. And so we want to use these de-escalation skills to avoid situations from getting worse. And so how we would do that is really in supporting what that client is needing at that point. If we're able to provide the resources, if we are just a listening ear, would that be the first level of de-escalation? Also, building relationships with that guest during the immediate intake can really help provide some skills down the line if crisis catches up and we need to use these de-escalation skills. And so I would really encourage the relationship aspect of this to be something that we can focus on and build every day with these different guests, because that will allow someone to step in and enjoy, or sorry, initiate some of the skills that we have. So it's really important, as long as you have those foundational pieces, to remember to stay calm. And if appropriate responders are contacted, really trying to walk that guest through what's needed to come, if there is any resources that they are able to kind of identify at the point of what would be helpful for them in terms of scaling back and resolving that behavior. And so what our main goal is to prevent law enforcement from being contacted. And so these skills ideally would be mitigating any need for that follow-up. And so kind of understanding the situation at the larger scale, giving that space and time in terms of listening, identifying what they need at that moment. And if you are able to provide that, doing it with calmness. And then if there are resources that they're trying to identify, really encourage using some of that problem solving skills to help them get to the point of being able to communicate, all right, this is what's needed. Let's get you to a place. For the meantime, we just need to calm down. I think that it is really important in these different skills to use language as this is our expectation, like in order to keep that calm environment. Sometimes that can often work against you as a trigger, but I think that it is a helpful piece to remind folks that within that environment, there are rules, there are expectations, and if it doesn't start to resolve, then appropriate authorities might be contacted, or they might be asked to leave and on a no entry list. And so I think starting with that piece of these expectations rules, then there can be that standard set of expectations. So, and then going into kind of understanding when to use these de-escalation skills. Oops, sorry, I went back to the beginning. So as mentioned, really trying to make it a point to avoid any police involvement, trying to deal with the situation itself, and so that it can be able to self-resolve without getting unnecessary folks involved. There certainly is times when that can't be prevented, and so I encourage you to do that as needed. I think a great technique that you can include is just checking in with your supervisor about when they feel a situation has gone to a point of needing to involve other authorities. And again, I kind of use that as in a general sense because it's important that we follow our own policy and procedures within the shelter, and really looking at avoiding any disruptive behavior, looking that it doesn't increase, and reminding them that it's important to calm down so that there is any risk of exceeding to authorities or getting kicked out. It's really important that there's just that reminder to reel it in. And so when that behavior begins to negatively impact others, that is a really good pinpoint time of when to use de-escalation skills. And so if you see that the environment is being impacted, remaining calm, using those techniques to ask for resources, ask for clarification if there is certain help that is needed, and then just kind of going through that and seeing if it can resolve in that way. So the strategies that I would suggest in using some of this de-escalation skills is really being non-judgmental and empathetic. Like I hear what you're saying. I'm trying to help in terms of getting these resources. And so really in that non-judgmental way, I think is the first part of dropping your weapon, like not actual weapons, but I think of that protection and that person starting to kind of level out. So respecting that personal space is a huge one as well. If they start backing up, kind of starting to not follow, and then using some of that nonverbal communication. And so keep your own emotions in check. Sometimes this can be challenging, but even if certain things are said to you, knowing your boundaries, and so really honoring that so it doesn't go past to the point that you're wrapped into these then personal emotions, and have to kind of step away within that. So focus on the feelings, responding back and repeating that. I can see that you're frustrated. I can hear that you're discouraged with this process. I think focusing on those feelings also really validates where they're at right at that point. Ignore challenging questions. I don't think within any piece of that outside of what resources can we help with? Am I understanding you? I think within those types of questions, we should focus our responses on, and not as much in the challenging aspect at risk of this becoming then a further trigger. Setting those limits, as mentioned, the boundary is really important so that you don't get caught up into an emotional response. So how that looks, and then give options. So although this kind of sounds a little bit in communicating with children, I think that's partly of any of us humans who are escalated to a point. Giving those options allows that self-choice and is really important for them to own that decision that they're making. Also, if it's necessary to create that distance and space, honoring the silence and allowing for that, because sometimes that just in itself can be one of the really helpful strategies to avoid any further escalation. And then allowing time to make a decision. So of those options that we have provided, what decision is going to be made in terms of honoring the expectations set up in that shelter environment, or if they're choosing to leave at that point, knowing that that is their decision. Okay, so when not to use this. If you're seeing that this is an active shooter situation, calling 911, following the protocol, and keeping yourself safe is priority. And not trying to intervene in any type of crisis that could involve further injury, just through any type of weapon. So not even necessarily active shooter, but if someone does have a weapon threatening violence, don't use these skills, just call 911. If you feel the situation is beyond your ability to safely intervene, that's a really great time to either step back, engage somebody else, or if there is no one else that you feel would be suitable, always call 911 if you're in that piece of escalation. So again, don't hesitate. I think the main goal is to try and avoid calling 911, but don't hesitate to truly see if this is something that isn't going to be resolved safely. And then also, if someone is displaying an inability or unwillingness to comply, I think that it's fair at that point to ask them to exit. If they wish to come back and work to resolve this at a different time, that's fine. But however that distance looks for your safety, it's really important that if they're not willing to comply, then they need to follow the rules and they need to be exited at that point. And so also, if the individual is displaying different skills of being able to self-resolve this, if there are deep breaths going on, if there is communication, if I just need space, I just need time right now, I think it's really important to not go further and just honor that, because I think that self-resolving piece is a huge skill that we're all trying to really learn. And so if we can empower that person to tap into that, it'll be really important. And then also, if you're seeing that the escalation is getting to a point of becoming too agitated, I think that that is another time just to give it space and honor that person. If it does become anything that would threat of violence in that continued agitation, I think it's important just to step back, but giving space can oftentimes lead to the self-resolving piece. And then also, if all of the attempts have been attempted and this person is still not complying, avoiding it escalating to further behaviors, it's best just to stop there, kind of pull someone else in or disengage completely. Any questions on this, when to use or when not to use these skills? So a really big takeaway is just going with the flow. Allowing that person who is in distress to try and communicate what it is that they're upset about, validating, using these different skills, focusing on the feelings, being non-judgmental. It really allows us to kind of meet the individual where they're at. One biggest piece, I think, as a takeaway is reminding yourself that we want to meet the individual where they're at, not where we're at. So if we're in this place of needing to comply and there's not an understanding of what's going on, likely there will be some escalation of different behaviors. And so to avoid that, I think it's really important in that non-judgmental way to approach that person where they're at, ask for different ways that they can communicate what is needed, and go from there. And so this is very individually based, and these skills are pretty standard, but they would ebb and flow very much to how the person is presenting. And remember, setting those limits for what's acceptable. This would usually come from your agency. So having those conversations of what is acceptable, where do we have limits, what are our boundaries, and even if that's something that isn't set in stone right now, that conversation can at least be the start to something that can give those policy and procedures life. And then reminding yourself to give folks choices so that it can feel validating in them making their own decisions. So those are the biggest takeaway pieces. They could be, this escalation practice can be used in many different settings, but I think for this specifically, the shelter setting, we want to be safe, keep others safe, and really have that goal in providing shelter shouldn't be traumatizing. And so really keeping to that and giving the support that's needed to maintain that understanding. So that is the majority of information I wanted to share today. My understanding is that the attendees within this training are new staff or staff that have been here for a while. I don't know if anyone would like to share something that's come up and just kind of a learning piece, but we have a little bit of time if there's anything that kind of pops up that someone would like to use as kind of a helpful example. Well, I know from personal experience, sometimes when you've done it the wrong way, you can learn really quickly and kind of what to avoid in the future. And so as you all are engaging, just keep that in mind, is that I feel like all of this is kind of a learning lesson and it's best by doing. These human beings, as all of us are complex. And so just giving yourself grace during these situations as well is really important. So if that's it, if there's no questions, then we can stop this training, and always feel free to reach out to me. I can put my email in the chat if necessary for future questions. So appreciate you all very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your service and your facilitation tonight.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Of course. I had a comment. So like earlier this week we had a community member who swung on one of our staff.
Yeah.
And the staff member, I was really impressed that he handled it. His emotions didn't change, his perception didn't change. And the way that he presented himself, I feel like completely de-escalated the whole situation. And he
Yeah.
used very few words. It was all about like his body postures and the way he stood and his energy. So I thought that was
Yeah.
pretty neat.
I think that there's also like, even within ourselves, that we're kind of teachers to different situations that take us out of our comfort zone. Having others that can kind of display that as well is really important, just to kind of see what it is that you had really pulled. I think, like you had mentioned, kind of just the presence, the body presence and all of that. Remembering that next time there's that high stress situation, pulling in all of the different teachers that we have within ourselves and also around us is really important. Because I'm sure from what you had seen, it can go the other way very easily. It could have gone terrible. And so I'm glad that that person was equipped.